Okay, my setting that I've just been involved in is a long-term rehabilitation for people with acquired brain injuries that has a multidisciplinary approach. The client that I've been working mostly with is Mr. X, who is a proud father of 4. Now Mr. X really enjoys physical activity, and he works really, really hard, but he plays hard as well. He has had a motor vehicle accident, and prior to that he earned a lot of money, and he really enjoyed his independence, and he really excelled in his productive occupations, and he's very, very passionate talking about his productive occupations, one of which was draining, and I think was the most recent one, and he very passionately talks about draining and how to do it and all of those kinds of things. And some other productive occupations that he was also involved in was mining and painting, and he was also involved for some time in the army. And some of his leisure occupations include things like gardening, loves talking about motorbikes, and he used to cook the family meal as well at home. So they're just a few of his occupations that he enjoys doing, and any kind of physical activity as well is what really engages Mr. X. So the model that I've used is the MOHO. It's the Model of Human Occupation by Kleinhofner. Now, I've used it because it considers volition mostly, and I really think that people with acquired brain injuries, due to their lack of insight, in some degree their volition changes from that. So particularly within the personal causation section. And also Mr. X has like some really subtle deficits that in some models it's not easy to see those deficits, but in the MOHO it really clearly states just things with habituation and habits of style and routine of style and all of those kinds of things. So it really breaks down where he's functioning at the moment. And then also I think in some degree it's setting appropriate because it really breaks down the environment aspects, and it really includes how that changes a person's occupational identity and how they now have to adapt due to an injury. So some of Mr. X's deficits are more higher executive functioning. He has no physical deficits. So things like inflexible thinking, poor initiation, spontaneity. Well, he has a reduced sense of spontaneity, reduced planning and sequencing. All of those things would suggest a frontal lobe deficit, but it's actually a left parietal lobe deficit that Mr. X has sustained. So some of the ethical issues that let me start that one again. The questions that I've asked myself is what ethical issues and how have I dealt with these? So the two ethical issues here were maleficence and autonomy, and it arose when Mr. X just wanted to go for a walk. He wanted to have the freedom and the independence to go for a walk, but we had a duty of care to him to ensure his safety. So we weren't allowing him, he was a new admission, so we weren't allowing him to go out and walk by himself. So this was obviously affecting his autonomy and taking away his locus of control. And then because of that, he was becoming quite bored as well, because he enjoys physical activity. So because he was becoming bored, he was having aggressive outbursts to staff. So what I did to deal with this was I actually made it a priority for the occupational therapist to assess Mr. X walking by himself around the neighbourhood. And then I provided Mr. X with immediate feedback during our therapy sessions about, what it is, where he was, what it was he was doing that was making him unsafe, and then how it needs to be improved. And that immediate feedback is very important for people with acquired brain injuries, which can be seen in Malia and Brannigan. And then the other one was, my second question was, how did the practice context on the occupational therapy program impact on the occupational therapy program and the person? So I've discussed enablers and barriers. So some of the enablers to that, to the practice context, were that it was a multidisciplinary team, which Malia and Brannigan again state that more input from lots of different therapists actually induces better recovery for people with acquired brain injuries. And then it also had a very strong occupational focus across all of those disciplines, and because it was also in residential houses as well, so those two factors combined, there was a better global transference of Mr. X's skills to things like his activities of daily living, and he had better access to things like gardening and cooking and things like that. And some of the barriers to the practice context were there were others within the residential house and the built practice context which had physical disabilities, and Mr. X, because he can't see that he has no physical disability, so he can't see that he has a disability, so then that doesn't help him understand why he is where he is. So that impacted on his insight, and then, you know, where there's a lack of insight, there's a lack of acceptance to your deficits and what you're actually capable of doing, and this can be seen in the Crossan's modified model of awareness, and then that also, again, that impacts on your well-being as well, because you can't understand, you can't accept the impact of your injury. And then another barrier was the cultural and language barriers between support workers and therapists, and then also clients as well. So Mr. X would sometimes become frustrated with those language barriers sometimes, where the information can become confusing as well, and then that can reduce the structure and consistency that is really required in that for people with acquired brain injuries. And this is also stated by Malia and Brannigan, who state that, you know, structure and consistency and routine is all very important things to have for people with acquired brain injuries to help them develop those neural pathways. And then the last question that I asked myself was, what were some of Mr. X's meaningful occupations, and then how did that impact on and how did I incorporate those into the therapy program? So obviously, Mr. X was told that he could not engage in draining anymore in his productive occupations, which is, you know, quite upsetting to hear. And then he was told that he couldn't drive too, which is another thing that was upsetting to hear, because he really enjoys motorbikes. He loves being on his motorbike. It gives him that freedom, it gives him that independence. So not being able to drive, not being able to engage in his productive occupations, we had to sort of, he's kind of had that shift in I guess occupational identity, because he really identified himself as a drainer and someone that, you know, rode motorbikes. So he's you know, that's had to change. So we focused on gardening. Well, I focused on gardening and cooking, which are two things that he really enjoys and are very meaningful to Mr. X. So through the gardening, we would transport to the community garden, where I would indirectly prompt him to complete tasks around the garden and to help improve the garden, and in the hope that this would improve his initiation and his sequencing. His initiation and his spontaneity to complete tasks. And then with the cooking, I was ensuring that he would have a meal plan and then a shopping list, and then we would again transport train to the shopping centre. So then this was helping him with some of his planning and sequencing difficulties that he was experiencing, and then that was giving him that independence. I guess using the buses increases the area within the community that he was able to access. So once he's able to use them independently, he can go anywhere pretty much. So that will increase his locus of control, increasing his independence, and then hopefully you know, impact on his well-being and help him better improve. Thank you very much for listening to me.